Before you can learn to walk, you must first learn to jump. Or that's what the scriptures tell us. Jumping in video games is one of the most natural and easily understandable mechanics there is. It's sometimes easier than walking, ironically. In fact, the only barrier between you and jumping in video games is figuring out which button it's bound to. Unless you're on PC, in which case it's heresy to have it as anything but the spacebar. Jumping is so prevalent that I find it a little jarring when you play a AAA title or even an indie game where there isn't a dedicated jump button. While jumping isn't in every game that has ever existed, it's safe to say that it's a staple of the gamer diet alongside unbuttered bread and anime. Everyone jumps. Mario jumps, Crash jumps, hell, even this kettle jumps. But who jumps the best? This truly is a question for the ages, and a fantastic excuse just to talk about jumping in video games, which is otherwise a very menial thing, but I feel like is underappreciated. First and foremost, I think it's important to set some ground rules. The first and most important question to ask is, what is a jump? Google gives us two answers to this question. Firstly, that jumping is pushing oneself off a surface into the air by using the muscles in one's legs and feet. And the second definition is to move suddenly and quickly in a specified way. That second one is just dumb and also wrong. I don't know if Google ever went to jump school, but I very much doubt it. If I would use this second definition, rolling and falling could be considered jumping, and that's something that I'm firmly against. Rolling and falling may look, sound, and smell like jumping, but they're different activities altogether. We're going to go with the first definition, but with the additional caveat that a jump has to be something that's consciously performed by the player, something you gotta slap the spacebar for. Auto jump can suck an egg. It doesn't count. Now that we've written our WikiHow article on what a jump is, I think it's time to make a methodology, and this is the part where I get to use my fancy university education, or I could just keep it nice and simple. Jumps are defined by three attributes. There's height, distance, and what I'm calling midair control, or MAC, if you want a naughty little acronym. There is a qualifying factor which kind of ties these three elements together, and it's how scripted a jump feels. As a gamer, you're entitled to feel in control of your jumpies. No one should take that away from you. Bonus points for variety in jumps as well. Sometimes you should jump a little different depending on where you are in the game or what slice of the world you're in at the moment. Even more bonus points for additional jump mechanics. We're talking double jumps, mid-air dash, just any of those boys that make jumps more interesting really. But before we jump into it, we gotta find our middle ground, a game and a jump that represent the absolute average in terms of height, distance, and mid-air control. I've sort of been thinking about this for a little while, and I keep coming back to the Borderlands games. I think maybe Borderlands 3 is the one to go with just because it's the newest one. So yeah, Borderlands 3, that's pretty much a strong 5. I'm going to be rating jumps in games that I've played and more specifically own because, well, I gotta leave something for the boys over at the Jump Academy to do in their spare time. Not to mention, I can't talk about things I don't own or have played, so if you disagree with that, leave me a mean comment in a different video. Let's start off with a game that really lets us down in the jump department, Witcher 3. Let's get this straight, it's a fantastic game, but it's got a weak-ass jump. The height is pretty good and the distance is average, but fuck me Geralt, your pale kickers feel really mechanical. I've got no time for how scripted Witcher 3's jumps look or feel, not to mention the lack of mid-air control. Witcher 3's jumps get a 3 for a game that doesn't have jumping until the third installment. Let's get a bit more positive though. Doom Eternal has a fantastic jump. It also has something that gives it a huge edge over the other loser jumpers. It has a double jump. Although what separates it from your average Crash Bandicoot is that it also has a mid-air dash, which is great for distance and superb for Mac. Honestly, if you want to break it down, Doom is almost all jumping. If you're good at Doom, then you're never not jumping. And hopefully I haven't busted my nut here early, but Doom is pretty much a 10 until someone's able to dethrone it, if they can at all. A close contender might be Super Meat Boy, which lets a piece of horny meat jump from one death pit to another, and it has much better height and distance than Doom, just by its nature, and maybe even a little bit more Mac, but it doesn't have any of the jump assisting mechanics that keep you away from the ground-dwelling freaks, and keeps Doom a bit more interesting in the long run. So I'm thinking Super Meat Boy and Doom are both currently sitting at the top of the pack for best jumps. Another game that has a really decent jump is Halo, which is kind of weird considering very few games that were popularized in the mid-2000s really cared that much about jumping. Both early and modern COD games have, they're pitiful jumpers really. In fact, most first-person shooters from the PlayStation 2/3 era have the jumping energy of a dead bird. So it's kind of surprised that when you see the flood in the library level of Halo 1, you shit your little 12-year-old knickers and jump about 400 feet in the air. Seriously, the height you can get in Halo games is really weird. The Mac is sluggish, but it's enough to make most Halo games a solid 8. I've been lumping a few games like the Halo games and Doom and Doom Eternal together, just because they have more or less the same jump across both games or the series. Another set of games that more or less has this is the Portal games, which are another set of fantastic jumpers. Portal 2 pulls a little fast one on all you boys and does a little jump-based tutorial humor.
Does any of this make any sense? Just tell me, just say yes. Okay, what you're doing there is jumping.
And yeah, I can agree with that, that's pretty good. It doesn't just talk the jump, it jumps the jump. Because of the pretty decent Mac and respectable combination of distance and height, it gets a 6. Actually bump that up to about a 7 because of the jumping joke in the tutorial. I'll tell you what, GTA 5 is popular. I don't think I can move on YouTube without running into about 7 GTA 5 videos. What boggles my mind is that none of these videos ever discuss how horrendous and absurdly bad the jumping in GTA is. Michael, I don't care about your personal problems. Learn to jump, you absolute breadstick. Look at this. It's more of a kick than a jump. It's so disgraceful. I give the jumps in GTA Chinatown Wars out of 10. As much as I love BioShock, the jumping isn't great. Even in BioShock 1 and Infinite, you have really heavy jumps, which is weird because in those games you play a fleshy non-daddy, but in BioShock 2 you play a metal daddy with lead-filled shoes and you still jump pretty much the same. Another little jumpy that's disappointing is Morrowind and Skyrim. I can forgive Morrowind because everything about that game has aged ridiculously poorly, and if you really want to break the game, you can jump too high and too far. But Skyrim really has no excuse because Oblivion nailed the hilariously so bad it's good jumping. Oblivion is probably like a 7 or 8 simply because you can get mad height and maintain some solid Mac even if the jumping animations are incredibly janky. Skyrim on the other hand is a bit more realistic to the point where jumping is unreliable and awkward most of the time. I gotta admit, it does have decent Mac, but it's too awkward and such a downgrade from Morrowind's ridiculously good jumping. I'll give Morrowind and Skyrim a 4. One of the more unsatisfying and limp jumps I've ever had the displeasure of being part of is in Kingdom Come Deliverance. It's got decent height, but the length and the Mac leave everything to be desired. The mid-air control just isn't there at all. It feels like almost an entirely scripted jump once you're in the air. Not to mention, I could get more distance from throwing a tissue. What's up with people in the Middle Ages and not being able to jump very far or reliably? You're never going to be able to compete in the Olympics when it's re-established in a couple hundred years if you're doing these limp jumps, being malnourished, and getting the plague. Absolute chumps. That's about a 1 for Kingdom Come. Jumping several hundred years into the future, Cyberpunk 2077, strangely enough, has a really similar jump to Kingdom Come. It's got the same issue where the middle of the jump feels entirely scripted, where there's no mid-air control at all. Once you jump, you're locked into that jump. Although, it does get a few more points for letting you surgically remove your old legs and get some better ones that let you long jump or double jump. Getting an infection from going to a random street surgeon is probably worth it if you're getting to jump better. Another similarly jump-impaired game is a nice little indie game called Eastshade. The game has a great atmosphere and it's really relaxing, but its jumps suck. Jumping is just nearly imperceptible in this game. It blows the scale out of the water with how weak-kneed these jumps are. Listen, Eastshade, get more Mac and height and then we can talk. Until then, sit on the bench. Let's hit up some above-average games and get a bit more positive. There are a lot of games, in fact most games are about an average or above average with the jumps. Rocket League gets some extra points for its jump because it allows a car to jump on the spot. And for you non-drivers out there, that's what the license-owning population call impossible. Prey lets you jump as a bin, that's pretty good. Minecraft has alright jumping, except that it gets points deducted for having auto jump on by default. Dying Light is another good one, but it is kind of like the weird kid that sat behind Mirror's Edge in class and copied their jumping homework. That's my way of saying that they both have pretty above average jumpies. Alright, I've come to a conclusion. I can't have a tie between Doom Eternal and Super Meat Boy. Looking at what makes jumping in both of these games good, I obviously need to take the best of both worlds and find a game with both. The fluid Mach and distance height combination of Super Meat Boy, and the additional jumping mechanics of something like Doom Eternal. So what's the perfect combination of these two jumping based, fleshy looking games? That's right, Celeste. Maybe it's not the natural cousin of Doom and Super Meat Boy, but it certainly takes what's good about both their jumps and expands on them, especially in how many additional jumping mechanics are peppered throughout the game's campaign. Between each levels and each act of the game, you generally have different jumping mechanics to play with, and that's really appreciated.
Now there's nothing left to do but roll out the red carpet for you, my friend. This camera, this camera, this camera. Let the people know what you have going on in your life.
No, that's not right. Celeste has certainly got a great jump, and there's something to being able to definitively and objectively categorize jumps based on a methodology, but video game jumps and video game mechanics in general, they aren't really objective and they can't really be rated like that. Don't get me wrong, my guy Celeste here is still very good. I mean, it meets all the criteria for like the best jump there is, but the thing is, there are so many other things that more or less could be in the same place that it is based on the criteria, like Dishonored 2, or, I don't know, No Man's Sky? The point being that almost any game's jumps is great in its own right, although it's got to match its context, you know? Oblivion and Halo's jumps are certainly fun, but they're also unrealistic depictions of jumps, so maybe the whole system is dumb. There are games that are all about jumping, Dying Light and Mirror's Edge, for example, but even something like Titanfall, these games have fantastic feeling jumps that certainly work for their chosen games, but they don't necessarily meet all the criteria that I've set out here. I don't think the system is flawed, but maybe jumps are just something that aren't meant to be compared. They're just one of life's many joys that you're supposed to appreciate in slow motion. Even a game like Eastshade, which has a 1 on this scale, or even lower maybe, is absolutely fine. It may be the jump equivalent of a wet fart, but Eastshade doesn't need a Halo jump mechanic. It's a game about exploring a beautiful world, drinking tea, and painting landscapes for these weird monkey people. The jump is fine. I guess that what I'm trying to say is that jump mechanics are contextual, and in most cases, they work absolutely fine for their games, except for the cases when you can't jump or the jump doesn't suit the game at all. And those are the real enemies. Maybe the important thing to take away from this video is that video games gives us the opportunity to jump in many different ways with their own quirks and personalities, and that should be appreciated. Listen folks, as long as you come away from this video with an appreciation for jumps, I feel that my work here is done. And the only other thing that you should take away from this is that GTA's jumping is trash. Alright, bye.